You're watching a Highwire Media podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dead Reckoning podcast. Today we're diving into the Flannan Isles Lighthouse mystery. Before we do this, give us your thoughts on topics we cover in the comment section below. And if there's something you want covered, let me know. I'd be happy to make it another episode. And of course, you can find us on social media. All the links are in the description. And with that, let's dive into today's episode. Imagine, if you will, a map of the world. Or better yet, go to Google Maps, type in Flannan Isles, hit return, boom, they appear. And that's why Google Maps is superior to other forms of mapping like Apple Maps and also paper. You'll eventually see a small cluster of tiny rocky islands. These are the Flannan Isles, also known as the Seven Hunters. And it's on this remote and windswept part of the planet that an enduring mystery took place at the turn of the 20th century. In early December 1900, principal lighthouse keeper James Ducat, second assistant Thomas Marshall, and occasional lighthouse keeper Donald MacArthur started their rotation at the recently built lighthouse on the largest piece of land to make up the Flannan Isles, Eileen Moor. The lighthouse had only been built a year before and was located in the outer Hebrides, where fierce winds, fog, and huge storms were putting many ships in danger. But the question is, did you really need 3 guys to run a lighthouse? Is that really necessary? What was this, turn of the 20th century? They would have got electricity. It doesn't need to be 3 guys. I feel like these days it would be like automatic. Well, we'll just put nuclear batteries in them now. Little mini nuclear batteries, which is kind of mind-blowing, right? But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're a few good decades before nuclear batteries existed. For the first couple of weeks, all seemed well on the island. The light was reported as being visible by ships that had passed it and gone on to dock at the harbors on the larger islands of Lewis and Harris. One day, however, the light went out. After delays due to bad weather, a boat was eventually dispatched on Boxing Day 1900 to Eileen Moor, and instead of 3 lighthouse keepers, they found no one. Ducat, Marshall, and MacArthur had completely vanished. What had happened to these experienced lighthouse keepers? Over the years, many theories have been touted as to what fate might have befallen these unlucky fellows. So let's find out the backstory to the mystery and see what we think is the most likely explanation. By the way, there was a recent movie made of this story called The Vanishing, but I haven't seen it, and I haven't looked up the ending, so I expect one of these explanations is going to be a giant spoiler. Yeah, if you got plans to see The Vanishing, well, we're about to ruin that for you. But this isn't like spoiling the new James Bond movie, it's The Vanishing. A movie from a few years ago that I've never heard of until I've looked it up recently. It probably wasn't that big of a deal back when it came out. Maybe it was. Kind of sounds like a horror movie, right? The Vanishing. And all those horror ones always seem the same. I never really see horror movies in a movie theater because they're just not as scary as when you watch it alone by yourself at home at night. Maybe out in the middle of nowhere, like in the countryside or something. That's when horror movies are most terrifying. As a kid, I lived in likely kind of be described as the middle of nowhere. I'd watch a horror movie and I'd be like, oh my god, this is the most terrifying thing ever. Sitting in the movies with a bunch of other people to watch a horror movie, like, well, it's just not that scary. There's like all these people around. If the psycho killer comes in, he's probably just going to kill one of them first, right? There's hundreds of people here. We're fine. The inhospitable conditions of the North Atlantic have bred myths and legends aplenty in the area of the outer and inner Hebrides. It's a wild and sparsely populated place, so it's not surprising that fairy tales and mysterious legends have popped up, even if they just started as things to keep the locals from getting too bored. Strange, non-Christian practices have apparently been mainstays over the decades, and because of the remoteness of the islands, It's not hard to believe that anything might be happening. The original Wicker Man film was set, although not filmed, on a Hebridean island. So if you can remember Christopher Lee skipping about in a flowery dress and a long black wig as part of a pagan ritual, that might not be too far off. Wait, isn't the Wicker Man... if the Wicker Man's got Christopher Lee, what was the Nicolas Cage one? Wasn't there that famous myth of him being like, not the bees, not the bees? Ah, my eyes. Is that called The Wicker Man? Or am I thinking something else? I feel like I saw that movie on TV like a while ago. But now I just remember like the memes and stuff. The ocean also provided stories, of course, with sea monsters, water spirits, and mermaids, a common feature in folk tales around the islands. The islet of Eileen Moor itself was surrounded in superstition and otherworldly beliefs, a lot of it centering on fairies. And just in my mind, I'm like, yeah, fairies, mermaids, other such nonsense are being haunted. There had been a long feeling of general weirdness around the place. I mean, there's definitely a dividing line between people who think ghosts are real and fairies and mermaids and all that kind of stuff, mythology, and others that are like, it can't be explained. And I don't know, it's just silly to me. It hurts me inside. It's like, why do you believe this? Stop it. It was rumored to be a place where bodies were cremated on pyres many centuries ago. The standing stones of Callanish on the nearby Isle of Lewis, which predates Stonehenge, also cast a somewhat mystical haze over the area. And I apologize for butchering these English names because I'm horrible at it. The Flannan mystical haze, it's just a haze. There's some rocks there that were put there in the past by an ancient culture. It's not mystery. It's not mystical. It's not even mysterious. It's just rocks. It's like Stonehenge. They're just rocks. I mean, Stonehenge, it's big and impressive, but it's just that. They're just rocks. If you want to get an idea of how big Stonehenge is, people used to be able to go up to it. So there's these old pictures of people, like standing next to it, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's bigger than you think. Because normally you just see pictures without people standing there, and you're like, oh, they're probably about the size of a person. Oh no, they are big. The Flannans are, ripping on mystical hazes. The Flannan Isles have never been permanently inhabited, with shepherds coming over to graze their sheep, but never staying overnight. The remains of a chapel, that is, why are your sheep commuting? What are you up to? The remains of a chapel to St. Flannan can still be found there. And there have been tales of it being abandoned shortly after it was built due to supernatural forces tormenting the monks that tried to worship there. Excuse me. When the new lighthouse was started in 1895, it was in opposition to locals who warned of the wrath of St. Flannan for disturbing his sanctuary. And indeed, one of the chief inspectors of the construction project died suddenly before it was finished, which is perhaps not the greatest omen for the new lighthouse. Yeah, omens were real. Also, can you imagine all the people who are like, a pilot? I was going to say driving ships, piloting ships. Do you pilot sailing ships? Whatever the correct word for like captaining a ship is. Like 700 men have died crashing into these islands. Their bodies are piling up, and they'll be like, yeah, but the ghosts. Well, obviously they built the lighthouse because that's what we're talking about today. Nevertheless, the Flannan Isles lighthouse was finished in 1899 and stood 75 feet tall. Counting the sheer cliff it was standing on, the lighthouse's 140,000 candle power lamp was about 275 feet above sea level, with a range of about 17 nautical miles, which is just under 20 normal miles, or about 32 kilometers. There were 2 areas for construction and supply boats to leave provisions or transport personnel to and from the island. These were the West Landing and East Landing, and were located basically as far from the lighthouse as you can get on the small island, right on the other side. That was because the lighthouse was placed at the highest point for the best visibility, and the landing areas were closer to sea level and somewhat sheltered. Steep concrete steps came up from these landing platforms to the lighthouse, and because of how steep it was, railway or tram tracks as well as cranes were also built to haul up supplies by cable. There was also a steam engine next to the lighthouse that powered the stuff going up and down these cable railways. As this was 1899, there were no telephones or even telegraphs to connect the lighthouse to the mainland yet. In fact, the only way that lighthouse keepers had to contact the outside world should an emergency happen was by hoisting a flag and putting some discs on poles sticking out of the lighthouse balcony. By putting whatever number of discs on whatever poles, they could send status updates to someone on the mainland who was supposed to be keeping an eye on the lighthouse as a fail-safe safety measure. At the time, this someone was Roderick Mackenzie, a gamekeeper living almost at the closest point to the Flannans on the larger island of Lewis. He had been given a telescope by the Northern Lighthouse Board and was charged with checking to make sure that the light was visible, and if the lighthouse keepers had hung out any alerts on their poles. So I guess the light's going to be behind them so they can see how many things, and also it's a telescope so they can see really far. Very old school. Because of the fog and bad weather in the area, it was not unusual for Mackenzie to not even see the light, let alone the actual lighthouse, for even a few consecutive days. So it wasn't particularly alarming if he couldn't see it from one day to the next. The lighthouse was manned by a team of 4 men, with 3 at the lighthouse and a 4th man living on the mainland, to be rotated every 3 weeks or so. The first year of the Eileen Moore lighthouse operation went smoothly and without incident, apart from one lighthouse keeper, William Ross, having an accident with the cable railway. He was fortunate in that the supply boat was still on the landing, meaning he could be taken ashore for treatment straight away, rather than being stuck on the godforsaken rock in the middle of nowhere, relying on a gamekeeper with a telescope to spot some discs. But by the time December 1900 rolled around, he was once again forced to leave the island due to illness. That meant that the party working at the lighthouse when the mystery event happened were Principal Lightkeeper James Ducat, Second Assistant Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, who was Ross's replacement and what was known as the Occasional Keeper, basically a part-timer drafted in as and when needed. The 4th member of the team who was on the mainland for this leg was Assistant Keeper Joseph Moore. A photograph of Ducat, Marshall, and MacArthur standing next to Robert Muirhead, who was the superintendent of lighthouses, was taken on the 7th or 8th of December 1900, all wonderfully mustached with plenty of shining buttons on display. This would be the last time that someone saw any of them alive. When they eventually made it to the small islands, a sense of foreboding came over the party. Okay, it's probably the mist, or maybe it's ghost. There was no flag flying, which was usual when the relief boat came. There were no empty supply boxes ready to be restocked. There were no men waiting to greet them. Obviously worried, the captain of the Hesperus blew the horn and fired some rockets into the air, but received no reply. Joseph Moore headed for the lighthouse, noting that the main entrance gate and 2 doors leading into the lighthouse were closed. Inside, he found a cold fire and neatly made beds. Checking the light room itself, he noted in a letter to the Northern Lighthouse Board, dated the 28th of December. Everything was in proper order. The lamp was clean, the fountain full, blinds on the windows. So there didn't appear to be anything wrong with the light. Indeed, it was left in good condition, with all procedures having been followed, just simply wasn't on. Moore lit the lamp, and the next day he and the crew of the Hesperus continued searching the island. Moore wrote the following day, quote, "We traversed the island from end to end, but still nothing to be seen to convince us how it happened." He noted that the east landing seemed all in order, with no indication that anything untoward had happened there. The west landing, however, was a mess. The box for holding ropes and tackle was missing, and some of the iron railings were broken. He also mentioned that Marshall and Ducat's sea boots and waterproofs were missing from the lighthouse. meaning that they had been wearing them. Excuse me. MacArthur didn't have such a good kit, just being an occasional lighthouse keeper. But his wearing coat, as it was called and creatively named, was still in the lighthouse. A telegram was sent to the Northern Lighthouse Board by the captain of the Hesperus on the day they reached the island, and found it mysteriously abandoned. It's quite short, so here it is. Quote, "A dreadful accident has happened at Flannan's. The 3 keepers have disappeared from the island. On our arrival there this afternoon, no sign of life was to be seen on the island. Fired rockets, but no response was made. Managed to land more, who went up to the station, but found no keepers there. The clocks were stopped, and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane or something like that. Night coming on, we could not wait to make something as to their fate. Oh my god, reading the past is so hard. Why did people write so weird back then? Does that even make sense? I'm like, did I misread that? It's like, no, it's just the weird past writing. I've left Moore, MacDonald, Boymaster, and 2 seamen on the island to keep the light burning until you make other arrangements. Will not return until I hear from you. I've repeated this to Moorhead in case you are not home. I will remain at the telegraph office tonight till it closes if you wish to wire me." As you can see, everyone assumed the keepers were killed due to bad weather. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of bad weather on the island. They were all outside, or 2 of them were wearing the waterproof stuff, so it makes sense why they were outside. Yeah, they could have gotten blown away or washed away or something. It seems pretty likely. Maybe they were down at their place where there was a mess and a big wave comes and takes them away. I don't know. Maybe the other guy was down there as well. Maybe he went out to get them in like a hurry, then they all got washed away. I don't want to say we've already reached a conclusion, but it seems like there's a whole lot of unknown here. It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of unknown here. I'm assuming there's more of a mystery or something, and we'll discuss that coming up. First of all, let's just revisit that gamekeeper with the telescope, Roderick Mackenzie. If the lighthouse had been dark since at least the 15th of December, why didn't he let anyone know? As previously mentioned, it wasn't uncommon for the lighthouse and its light itself to be hidden from the mainland for a day or sometimes several days at a time. For example, according to Mackenzie, he'd seen the light on the 7th of December, but not again until the 12th, so he wouldn't have been worried straight away. Also, the new rotation of keepers was due to go out on the 20th of December anyways, so even if he had raised concerns, everyone would have assumed that there was something technically wrong with the light, which they'd sort out on the 20th, not that every man on the island was gone. Unfortunately, due to poor weather conditions, the relief ship did not set sail until 6 days later, on the 26th of December. By this time, it was too late to help the keepers. But it seems that even if they had known they were in trouble, By this time, it was too late to help the keepers, but it seems that even if they had known they were in trouble, they still wouldn't have been able to safely mount a rescue much earlier. Mackenzie was getting antsy though, and he had asked other people to see if they could have better luck at spotting the light from the Flannan Isles. In his report, Moorhead admits that even if a trained lighthouse keeper had been on the lookout and might have reported the light being out much earlier, it still wouldn't have prevented the occurrence that led to the man vanishing and presumably dying. Let's get into some theories surrounding the disappearance. As stated at the beginning of this piece, the area of the Flannan Isles was home to many superstitious and ghostly tales. So let's tackle this bit head on. There were rumors that when Joseph Moore, the relief lightkeeper, stepped onto the Flannan Isles from the Hesperus, 3 very large black birds took flight from the rocks and disappeared. Spooky as that sounds, there's absolutely no evidence that this happened. It's surprising Moore didn't mention it in his report, and it seems to be one of those retroactively added sprinkles of intrigue that in reality never occurred. Would have been cool if it had. Other supposed facts about the case, added later and mixed into history, were that the Lighthouse logbook contained entries mentioning storms and conditions so bad that the men were crying and praying to God. Again, these were not real. Muirhead looked at the logbook and the daily slate entries, and they made no mention of any of the men crying or having misgivings about the weather. In his report, all that was noted, according to him at least, was the routine stuff that they'd do day to day. Also, these men were seasoned lightkeepers. Well, used to be being holed up while some bad storms crashed all around them. There'd be no reason to suddenly start cracking. Sea monsters and giant birds have also been given as the perpetrators in the disappearance of the three men, but come on. When aren't they? As usual, it was the Loch Ness Monster. I mean, this is Scotland after all. As per usual, the thought of a huge sea serpent, or heck, the Loch Ness Monster, why not? Grabbing the men off the platform is exciting, but as no reliable or truly credible sightings of said monster have been seen before or since, I think we can leave that one on the no pile. There's also one very large sticking point that seems to put a hole in most of these theories. It was an ironclad regulation that at least one person had to be in the lighthouse at all times. So how come all three men disappeared? Did they do it all at once? Or maybe over a series of hours, or even days? Sure, you can maybe imagine a scenario where two men are outside and get into difficulty so the third rushes out to help them. But, as we'll discover, it's not quite so obvious as all that. Let's look at some of the other theories before diving deeper into that one. So, abduction. For what reason? What purpose? Nah, we're going to abduct them so more ships crash. Oh, that's going to be a great laugh. We're going to abduct them for money. I'm not sure, but I don't imagine the lighthouse keepers are super rich. A weird but slightly plausible idea is that of abduction. No, not the alien kind. A teeny rock in the middle of the ocean with three men on it probably wouldn't catch a passing spaceship's attention. Our whole planet wouldn't catch a passing spaceship's attention. If a spaceship is passing our planet, there's nothing here for them. We're like you're on a walk in the forest and there's an anthill. That's it. You look at the ants and you're like, then you move on. Because that's how you know, that's how aliens would view us. Because they've got a spaceship, we've got spaceships, but they're kind of jokes. We're talking spies or pirates here. Maybe a shipload of swashbuckling scurvy dogs or a stealthy boat of sinister agents rocked up one night and forced the keepers to leave the island against their will. I mean, I guess it's within the realms of possibility. However, remember that they were on an island in the Atlantic, specifically to prevent ships from getting wrecked. So rocking up was right there where there was a high probability of hitting something. There's not so much a chance that a boat would be able to get near enough to the island without knowing the area. And if the light was working as it should have been before the 15th, the keepers would have spotted them hours before. If it did seem like there were ne'er-do-wells approaching, they could have barricaded themselves in the lighthouse or something. Also, while they might know a bit about the weather conditions around the Hebridean coast, your average lightkeeper probably wasn't going to be the key to helping you with an invasion or make much of a hostage. As we've already established, it took 11 days from the men disappearing for anyone to realize they were gone. In the times before quick communication, they'd be pretty useless as hostages. So let's move on. If this is reminding you of that other famous maritime disappearance of the people on the Mary Celeste, you're correct. Excuse me. Both cases were also reintroduced into the public consciousness years after, where people wrote fictionalized accounts of the event. With the Mary Celeste, it was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle writing a first-hand account of a survivor with a similarly named Marie Celeste. Elements from this made-up story entered the collective memory to the extent that people still refer to the ship as Marie Celeste instead of Mary Celeste. The same thing happened with the missing lightkeepers on the Flannans. In 1912, a poem written by Wilfred Wilson Gibson, boringly called Flannan Isles, described the event from the point of view of the men on the relief vessel getting to the island on the 26th of December. He describes the three large blackbirds and also that there was an untouched meal on the table. He also mentions how all previous lightkeepers there had met a sticky end or gone mad. None of these things were true, but the detail about the meal being on the table especially stuck in people's minds. Another eerie but explainable fact of the story is that when the men from the Hebrides entered the lighthouse, it was noted that all the clocks had stopped. This is not a chilling pointer to the time of their deaths, however, just a sad indicator that they had been gone for a while, as the clocks needed regular winding to work. Yeah, I almost commented earlier when I was like, the clocks had stopped? Well, that's a bit weird. Did the water come in here? They were just old clocks. They need winding like every few days because they're old. If they'd all wound down, it meant that the men had been gone for at least a week. Or they need winding at least every week. So what other things could have happened to cause three men to vanish? Well, let's just backtrack a bit and take a look at that poem again. Gibson wrote, quote, "And how the rock had been the death of many a likely lad, how 6 had come to a sudden end, and 3 had gone stark mad." This is a working theory in some quarters that one or more of the men had basically cracked from the pressure of living so far from their real homes in such claustrophobic and demanding conditions, and had either killed the other 2 men or had tried to kill himself, had been restrained, but unfortunately everyone had ended up falling to their death. So is this credible? Well, I mean, sure, there's no bodies or anything, so it's really hard to prove, but maybe it did happen. Doesn't seem like the most likely explanation, but I'll give this one a bit of credit. Maybe they looked into it, and maybe we'll find out more. Sure, being a lighthouse keeper isn't for everyone. Yes, there were 2 other people living with you. But what if they were the loudest chewers, or had some sort of gastrointestinal problems? If you fart again, John, I'm going to murder you and throw you off a cliff. Petty issues can become major flashpoints when you're living in close proximity for extended periods of time. And it's not like people were being psychologically vetted for roles like this. In fact, Donald MacArthur, the occasional lighthouse keeper who was there as a replacement, was an ex-soldier and had a reputation as being somewhat of a hothead. Add to that he had come almost directly from another shift somewhere else, and you've got someone who'd been working without a break in bleak conditions for a couple months straight. Yeah, that does sound pretty tough, but also, there's a big difference between, work is really hard to, let's murder these 2 guys because, well, it won't make absolutely any difference, and then kill myself. I mean, sometimes work is hard and I go home and it's not like I'm not murderous, I'm just like, let's watch some TV. Add into that rumor, although it's a quite strong one, that he was a drinker and that drink was not allowed on the premises of the lighthouse, and you've got an individual who'd be irritable, to say the very least. Well, I have to say, maybe if there's the lighthouse keepers in the middle of nowhere, they should be allowed a few beers at the end of the day. Because I don't know, probably helps you unwind, doesn't it? Like, what are you doing? Well, we're stuck on this island and the food's terrible and there's no beer. It's like that Simpsons episode where he goes to the Shining Hotel or whatever it's called. Is that the Simpsons? Crap. Shoot, I think I got the wrong show. Y'all let me know in the comments section below, but, they go to the hotel, there's no beer, no TV, and beer, and he goes crazy. There was definitely no TV, I mean, this was like the early 20th century. Actually does sound pretty rough, to be honest, but not rough enough to become murderous. So did he just snap and kill one or both of the other 2, and then, in a fit of remorse, throw himself over the cliffs? Or maybe they were all arguing or struggling way too near to the edge, and they all fell to their dooms. It could also be possible that one or more of the keepers was affected by mercury. Keith McCloskey, who researched this mystery thoroughly and wrote a book called The Lighthouse, also posits that the mercury the lenses floated in could have adversely affected one or more of the keepers and led them to behave in a strange way. There's lenses floating in mercury in the lighthouse? Okay, this could have then escalated into a situation outside where strong winds could have blown them all over. It's a bit of a stretch though, right? It's like having a fight or argument inside. Hey, you know what? We should have this fight outside. I mean, that seems reasonable. Outside by the edge of a cliff? It seems less reasonable. It's theories like this that can never be proven one way or the other. But there are instances, even in more recent past, where people isolated in lighthouses have committed murders. So it's not something that we could strike off completely. I mean, it just seems less likely than being swept away by the weather, doesn't it? And just because some murders have occurred in lighthouses, it's like, oh yeah, some murders have occurred everywhere. There's murders all the time. Doesn't mean that necessarily lighthouse keepers are murderers. It also seems to be the general consensus that if anyone was going to be on a killing rampage, it would have been MacArthur. As no bodies were ever found, though, any evidence of foul play has long since disappeared. According to Archie Meacham, who later worked on the lighthouse, the men disappeared in the line of duty, trying to help save a ship in trouble. He suggested that a ship was spotted from the lighthouse and all the keepers rushed out. In the process of throwing ropes to aid the stricken vessel, they were themselves washed away. But is there any record of a stricken vessel? The wreck of a Norwegian ship was apparently found not long after the disappearance. But it does beg the question, why did all three men leave the lighthouse when protocol dictated that one should remain inside at all times, especially when the light would be crucial in a situation such as this? Well, again, the same argument can be made. They saw their mates in trouble, so they went out to help. Screw the law. And how long does it take to put a coat on? Surely MacArthur would have had time to throw it over his shoulders, knowing that they were heading down to the landing in bad conditions. If they did perish in the line of duty, it was all for naught. As if they did manage to save a ship, it would have reported the incident once it made it to port. By far the most popular theory in the disappearance of the three men is that two men were working on the west landing when a freak wave, knocked both of them out into the sea. This makes perfect sense. The third man in the lighthouse generally agreed to be MacArthur, as his coat was left on the peg inside, rushed out to help, and ended up meeting the same fate. This just seems like the most obvious, easy answer. This is what the superintendent, Robert Moorhead, deduced must have happened in his report to the Northern Lighthouse Board. But there are some very big questions about the version of events. The first issue is the report itself. It's the only one there is, so that's all the information anyone had to work with. The matter was also considered closed shortly after, with no fatal accident report having been carried out, which would normally have been done in such circumstances. The logbooks were never taken in evidence or just disappeared along the way, leaving very little official documentation about anything relating to disappearances. This doesn't sound like a conspiracy or trying to hide anything. It was just like, there was an accident, people were lazy, they lost the records. Some people have suspected that this was a cover-up of some kind, but covering up what or why, I have no idea. So let's talk about that wave. The box that held some ropes on the west landing was, according to Moorhead, around 110 feet or 30 meters above sea level. If a wave had reached that high up the island, it would have been one of the largest ever anywhere in the world. I think that was what I was saying about those rogue waves, right? The largest one ever recorded was like 20 meters. I have a feeling maybe they would get up to like 30, but it was like unbelievably rare, if not just impossible. I guess it could have been lower and the spray was scattered higher, making the concrete steps slippery. But seriously, 100-foot waves do not come along every day. And if we are to believe that, say, one man got swept away, the other man had to hot-foot it back at least 160 slippery concrete slabs or steps, then run all the way across the island to his boots and heavy coat to alert the third lightkeeper. This would have taken a considerable amount of time. The third man apparently dropped everything and just sprinted out with his colleague back back down to the landing, where another freak wave occurred at exactly the same time they got there. This is actually not sounding likely to me. I have to say, during this whole thing, I guess I'm totally wrong. Was that lighthouse person who stayed in the lighthouse able to see the west landing and could see his friend in trouble? Or hear them or something? So why would he head down there if he didn't know they were in trouble? Maybe they're like, well, I'll be back in 10 minutes. If we don't come back, come get us. But then that would be breaking the rules. I'm more on the side of he'd break the rule if he saw his friends drowning, but he wouldn't do it if it was just like, they've been a while. He'd be like, well, I'm just going to have to wait because that's the rules. Maybe they attempted a rescue operation by throwing down ropes and just slipped in themselves or something. Honestly, one monster wave hitting the island I can cope with, but the chances of two enormous waves hitting the island twice in a short period of time are tiny. The logbook did not mention that there was a huge storm in the area either. And while there was a storm potentially large enough to have caused the damage at the West Landing, it did not happen until 2 days later on the 17th of December. Also, none of the bodies ever washed up, although given the long time it was between them disappearing and the relief boat coming, they may have floated out to sea. I have a theory. No, really, I have a theory. The guy in the lighthouse, right? The one who's remaining, he's watching because his mates have gone down to that landing area. And a 30-meter wave, you're going to notice that. And that is absolutely massive. So he's hanging out in the lighthouse and he sees this 30-meter wave coming towards the island. Smashes the island. The two guys are washed out to sea. Those guys are gone. He's like, oh, I got to get down there. He looks out. There's no more waves coming. No 30-meter waves. He goes down there, climbs right down. He's like, my friends are gone. And then a smaller but still large wave comes along and sweeps him out to sea as well. There are other things that come across as weird about the whole situation, assuming it went down on the West Landing as Moorhead reported. Number one, why was anybody on the West Landing at all? According to the notes they made that day, all the usual lamp preparations, etc. had been done, so nothing urgent needed doing. It was December in Scotland. The sun sets at 4 p.m. that time of year. Man, winter sucks. So lighthouses do all their chores during the day and rest up and do indoor stuff in the evening. There's no way that a seasoned lighthouse keeper like James would start some big maintenance project on some slippery concrete steps at 2 or 3 p.m., knowing that he only had an hour or so of decent daylight left. Basically, there was no reason for anyone to be outside in bad weather at that time, unless something urgent came up that they did need to take care of. It could have been something, we don't know what it is though. Moorhead stated in the report that the prevailing winds went westerly. If that was the case, then why were they on the exposed West Landing? There were 2 landings available on the island, and the other was on the more sheltered east side, which had no reported damage. If they were expecting a relief boat on the 20th, it could have just been that they used the east landing. Therefore, again, there was no need to clear anything from the West Landing, especially 5 days before the relief boat was due. I was just assuming maybe there's some stuff stored down there from the previous relief boat, something they needed. I mean, there's obviously a reason they went down there, and I'm sure it was Dole. It wasn't like some mysterious, they had to go down there for some reason. And number 3, as I previously stated, it's a long way from the landing to the lighthouse. MacArthur would not have been able to see what was going down at the landing, so it's unlikely he would have bolted outside without putting a coat on. Also, he had to stay in the lighthouse as per procedure, so he probably wouldn't have left it unless notified by one of the other keepers. And again, it's such a long way from the landing to the lighthouse that he might as well have put a coat on. Seeing as how much time would already have passed. The outer and inner doors being closed when the relief boat finally made it may not mean anything, as it's possible they could have been banged shut by the wind at some later point. Maybe he was rushing down there. Maybe the wave hadn't even hit yet because it was still light. So he could have seen this giant 30-meter wave coming and been like, oh my god, I gotta get down there now to tell my friends that it's coming. In the meantime, it hits, they get washed out to sea, he goes down, blah blah blah, pans out like I said. I think it's a good theory. Number 4. It's been mentioned that one of the keepers had previously been fined for losing supplies in a storm, and that maybe they were securing some ropes on the west landing to avoid being fined again. Again, no one was coming for at least 5 more days, and I'm no expert in lighthouse keeping, but I think there'd be enough time left during another day to do that, rather than suddenly deciding to do it in the middle of bad weather, with the light fading. If that is the reason the men were outside, it's a terribly sad outcome for a seemingly unplanned, reckless bit of behavior. The ropes were still there after all, with the storage box being smashed to pieces. So, what might have washed them away 2 days before their deaths? A rogue wave? They're real things. People didn't think they were for a long time, which is probably why none in the initial reports would think about this. They thought that people just didn't think they were real. But now we know they're real, because we have satellites or whatever detecting them. I don't know the specifics. It seems that there could be another culprit where weather is concerned, and that's the wind. Maybe Ducat and Marshall were outside doing something by the lighthouse and just got blown over the cliff. MacArthur maybe did see them and rushed out to help, falling victim to the same treacherous gusts. It is a fact that winds around the Flannans and the lighthouse itself can easily be strong enough to knock people down and even lift them off their feet. So, for my money, this seems to be the most likely explanation for how the 3 disappeared, even if Moorhead thought it unlikely. Sad though it is, it's probably that the force of nature just caught them out. Joseph Moore, who was due to relieve one of the keepers and was the first man on the island after the disappearance, was badly affected by the whole affair. So poor Joseph Moore had to keep working in a place where 3 of his friends and colleagues had just vanished and presumably died. He was plagued by the tragedy and felt a huge psychological burden for the rest of his life. Also, remember the, apologies for butchering the name, Arctur, the ship that may or may not have reported the light being out? It disappeared in the North Atlantic in 1912, presumably sinking with all hands lost. In 1904, a new lightkeeper on the island, John McLaughlin, fell from the lighthouse tower while cleaning the glass, making a total of 4 keeper deaths in 4 years. William Ross, who was supposed to be on rotation at that time but was replaced by Donald MacArthur, dropped dead the year following the disappearance in another Hebridean lighthouse. The fact that the bodies of Ducat, Marshall, and MacArthur were never found adds to the mystery and general spooky feeling around the islands. And nowadays we can only speculate as to what really happened. As for the lighthouse at Eileen Moor, it was automated in 1971, meaning that nobody has to stay on the island ever again. I bet it's spooky out there, because I bet there's all that old, they didn't take it all away in the landings and stuff. I bet it's creepy, and I'd kind of like to go. Anyways, this has been an episode of Dead Reckoning. Thank you so much for watching it, or listening to it, depending on how you consume the show. It's available on YouTube, and also a podcast, if you prefer to get it that way, whatever you like. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up if you like the video. And if you're listening as a podcast, make sure that you leave me a review. Make sure you're subscribed and all that good stuff. And if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee by scanning the QR code right there, or using the link in the description. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll see you next time.